Today on Travels with Bill, we're going to spend an entire episode talking about just one piece of paper. Well, kind of. We're here at the Swan Valley Historical Museum outside the train station. It's the Bozeman station, and inside there are tons of railway artifacts, including a piece of paper that's a copy of the train order for Her Royal Majesty, the Queen, to visit Swan River. Wait, the Queen in Swan River? She sure was, back on July 11th, 1970. The trip was part of a tour of Manitoba, marking the centennial of our province. Now, in 1970, it wasn't like you could just point a cell phone and record. You'd need to find someone who had a film movie camera to be able to relive the moment. And as it turns out, well, that film actually exists. Obviously, the Royals had a train to travel on, but that isn't how they arrived in Swan River. Here they are driving down Main Street. You may recognize that building as where Merv's is now, Woody's Goodies that you might remember, and in a moment we're going to see the old co-op. So why didn't the Royals arrive in Swan River on the train? Why are they in vehicles? Well, the reason may surprise you. That Saturday morning, the Prince of Wales left the train in the pond, flew to Flin Flon, then Norway House, then landed in Swan River and rejoined the train. Meanwhile, the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, and Princess Anne left the train in the Pas and drove to Swan River. Along the way, they stopped at the Red Deer River for a break. Then they joined the Royal train in Swan River at the station. So why didn't they just ride the train? Because the track went into Saskatchewan. And you see, the Royals weren't visiting Saskatchewan, so protocol required they not set foot in that province. The railway track from the Pas to Swan River ran through Hudson Bay, so they got off the train and made their way to Swan River by plane and car, while the train ran empty through Saskatchewan. Once in Swan River, they again began traveling by train. That avoided a huge protocol faux pas. We're back at the museum looking at one more of the train exhibits because, well, it's amazing, isn't it? That's handmade. On the wall of that exhibit, though, is a photo of an engine. Well, that's an old F9 type engine, and that's kind of what the train looked like that the Royals were riding. Well, almost anyway. You might remember from the train orders it was CN 6508. Well, here's 6508 in Montreal on November 11th, 1957. That's one nice looking engine. As far as engines go, you kind of worry they might eventually end up in a scrap heap. Dorval, Quebec, July 1st, 1973. This was after the train was in the Swan River area with the Queen. Here we are again. This is 1975 in Kamloops. Well, that's a mighty fine-looking train, isn't it? But the ultimate question is, whatever happened to CN 6508? Here's Port Mann, April 10th, 1976. But did it survive? Is 6508 still around today, or is it in a scrap heap someplace? Well, it became a Via Rail engine. By 1981, it was in Via Rail colors. Remember when they used to have the F9 units? After that, it ended up at the Waterloo St. Jacobs Railway in new paint scheme, a bright yellow front on it there. Then some interesting history. It turns out it went to BC, then to Ontario. Here it is at the Ontario Southland Railway in August 2015. In fact, we can even take a look inside the cab of 6508. The person driving the Queen way back in 1970 sat right here. But does the train still exist? Well, we reached out to the Ontario Southland Railway, and here's the train in November of 2021, going along just fine. That's some amazing railway history. But wouldn't it be even better if we could find some actual video of the train? Well, turns out we can. This is the actual locomotive that back on July 11th, 1970, pulled the Queen into Swan River. Well, not into, but it sure pulled her out of Swan River after she got back on the train, and it still exists today. It's in Ontario now, but isn't it so cool the engine's still around? Now, as we were preparing this episode, some folks said to us, well, that's not true. The Royals weren't here on July 11th. They were here for the Northwest Roundup. Well, it turns out memories can be tricky. You see, they were at the fairgrounds. At 7:05 p.m. on the 11th of July, the Royals went to the fairgrounds. They watched pony chuck wagon races, the RCMP, the high school bands, and several other numbers. At 7:45, they left the fairgrounds, went to the train, and it went to Dauphin. You see, there was a special performance put on for the Royals. So if you were young at the time and remember them being at the fair, well, what you're actually remembering is them being at the special show that was put on a few weeks earlier. Well, history has a funny way of coming alive, doesn't it? From a piece of paper you may have never noticed on the railway station wall to seeing the train go by here, well, 50 years later, it's kind of cool. Thanks for dropping by Travels with Bill. If you want to know more about the Swan Valley Museum, certainly you can do that. Drop by the museum. You too can see those train orders. Have you subscribed to the channel yet? Make sure you get your subscribe button clicked and hit that like button as well. then you'll see the next episode of Travels with Bill. So long for now from a rail line in Ontario as we watch the old CN 6508 roll on by.